Welcome, everyone. I can see people are still coming in the room. We are recording this, so if you miss any of the beginning or the end, if you have to jump off, it will be provided on our YouTube channel later this week. I am Liz Marion, the virtual events producer, and I want to welcome everybody to our first installment of Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition. Today we have guest Jay Davis, and leading our conversation, Bunker Labs CEO Blake Hogan. I want to remind everybody that please drop your questions in the Q&A box that is at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It is 2 chat bubbles. If you put your questions in there, we will push them to be answered live at the end of our session. Also, feel free to chat amongst yourselves in the Zoom chat. I will also be dropping links throughout the event in there that will link you to Jay or his company, but also to some other exciting events that we have coming up around this topic. Also, if you are interested in entrepreneurship through acquisition, I'm going to drop a link to bunkeronline.org. We have a special group in our online community that is around this topic where people like Jay and experts and other entrepreneurs that have gone through the acquisition process will be in there ready to answer your questions, as well as Bunker Labs staff. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Blake Hogan. Hey, Blake.
Awesome. Liz, thank you. Nick, thanks for the great beach music. I feel like we should all be on a beach today. So thanks to all of you for joining. So I'm Blake Hogan. Welcome to Nashville, Tennessee, where Jay and I are both coming to you live. So for those of you that haven't had a chance to be a part of the Bunker Labs community, I want to welcome you. Bunker Labs exists to do 2 things. We want to support entrepreneurs, and we want to build thriving, diverse communities so that entrepreneurs can plug into that. And then they can go on to do a couple of things. They can launch their businesses, they can grow their businesses, or they can scale it. So we exist to help you throughout that journey. So as you're leaving military service, you can plug into a community. You can test an idea with our program, Launch Lab Online. So if you've got something you're thinking about, and you're like, hey, is this something I really want to jump into? That's a great place to do that. When you've got traction and you've got some demonstrated users or some early revenue, look at applying for our Veterans of Residence program, which is a partnership with WeWork. Right now, there are currently 23 cohorts that are actively going on throughout the country right now in a 6-month fellowship program. And then those that are looking to scale their businesses can join our CEO Circle cohort. And that's what we're talking about today is we don't always have to go and start something. You can go and buy something. So I've never been accused as a Marine of being like the highest intellect. So I've always, when I found out about this opportunity to buy something, I was like, that's it. How do we do that? So I started that journey personally here when I got to Nashville and started looking at companies and no idea what I was doing, and got connected to Jay, and Jay has been a wealth of knowledge. So I want to thank you, and I'm going to do a quick introduction, Jay, and then I'll turn it over to you. So for those of you that have not had a chance to meet Jay, I'm fangirling a little bit because I've got his signed book right here, the Harvard Business Review, where there's a case study in here around his company, Vector Disease Control. Which I know is a super sexy company that you're all super excited to learn about. So Jay is the entrepreneur in residence, teaching the Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition class at Harvard Business School, and is the founder or co-founder of the Nashton Group, and then bought a company called Vector Disease Control, which they grew, and then that was acquired. And now Jay is doing a number of things to support folks that are in this space. So today is really about 2 things. It's one for those of you that have never heard of buying a business to just sort of get a really quick, like 101, what does that look like? And some resources to continue down that path. And then for those of you that are either in that path right now, or you're currently looking to invest in folks that want to buy those, or you're trying to buy companies, to get all of us better connected. So at the end of today, our hope is that you go to bunkerlabs.org and join that Bunker Online community specific to entrepreneurship through acquisition, and share your feedback. Let us know, hey, this was super helpful. I'd really like to hear more about this, or I was wondering about this, but we didn't get a chance to get to it. So this is about building a community and bringing that ecosystem together. So I want to turn it over and say thank you to our guest, Jay. So Jay, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more, and we're going to get into this. And the first question will just be, what is search? What does that look like? And then we'll get into what that looked like for you.
Sure. Well, thanks, Blake, for having me. As you know, it's been a pleasure to get to know each other the last couple of years, and I have been excited about what you're doing at Bunker Labs. So I appreciate the chance to be here. I'll just start with sort of very high level. What is ETA? And then why don't you just point me in any direction that you want to take it.
Got it.
So the idea, I was just like you, Blake, when I first heard about entrepreneurship through acquisition, I thought it was sort of too good to be true. And that was 12 years ago now, I guess. And I've spent the last 12 years in this world. So, and it's been a blessing. At the highest level, entrepreneurship through acquisition is just a way to buy an existing business. And when I started down this path 12 years ago, there was a fairly specific model to do that, where investors, these are mostly individual investors, so high net worth individuals, would back an entrepreneur, usually a young, relatively little business experience. So whether recently out of college or business school, or even folks out of the military, like the folks on this call, investors would back them to search for a business. And that search process would take anywhere from, let's say, 12 to 30 months or so. And the entrepreneur would use the capital from those investors to fund a search process, which includes travel, small salary, office, et cetera. Once that entrepreneur found a business that they wanted to acquire, they then take that opportunity back to those investors who provide the equity capital to buy the business. That is it in a nutshell. Over the last decade or so, and like we can sort of go in any direction you want, but there have been other, I guess, methods that have been developed to do that, just little twists or nuances to it. But the idea is that investors back a young CEO to go find a business to buy.
Yeah, and that's great. I think it's important for folks. I think the thing that I want people to get out of this is like, know that this is an option, and that there are multiple ways to do it. And you know, the Buying a Small Business book that Liz linked to is a great way to look at that. What I'd love to do is just get a little bit more into your story and your journey of how you ended up with like, one, how you decided that this was the path for you, that like, hey, this fit, you know, you're like, I've got a family, this like makes sense for us. I'm not sure I want to go through the startup phase. And then talk about the actual, you know, purchase of vector disease control. And as we're starting to get questions in already, I'll kind of prep this because I think this makes sense. The question is sort of, who is the ideal candidate for this option? So I think there's that. Okay, so I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit more about how you started it and what that looked like to get to the purchase point of vector disease control.
Yeah, so I mean, it's sort of related to the question, I guess, but I went back to business school, and my professional goal was to be a business owner one day. And I really just didn't know how I was going to get there. And so, like many of you, I was thinking, or my guess is many of you were thinking, the way to become a business owner is to start a business. And I did not have any great ideas at that time. And I was between my years in business school, and my now business partner and classmate and I wanted to do a study sponsored by a professor. And it's funny looking back, but we went into his office and we said, we want to study young people who buy existing businesses. And he looked at us a little bit like we were crazy. And he said, have you heard of a search fund? And we said, no, what's that? And so he explained the concept, which is essentially what I just explained to everyone. And for me, it is one of those moments I'll never forget. So it just sort of hit me like, that's exactly what I want to do. And so it was that moment. I never really looked back. I thought there's a chance for me to go buy a business and become the largest shareholder and the CEO all at the same time. And that's what that opportunity was. So it was just from there forward, we went down the path. I say we, that's my business partner and I. And so we raised what's called a search fund right when we finished business school. That was June of 2008, which was an interesting time to go down this path, not dissimilar to the world today, a different context, obviously, but in the fall of 2008, there was a lot of uncertainty, and it took us a long time to find a business. And there were a lot of ups and downs. And during the search process, my business partner and I both got married. We both, well, he had children. I was a little bit behind on that, but we had a lot of personal things happen. So it was a pretty emotional 2.5 years. You don't know where you're going to be, where you're going to find the business. But ultimately, we found a company, you mentioned, Blake, Vector Disease Control. We acquired that business in January of 2011. So it took us 2.5 years to find and close something. It's a little bit longer than average. And VDCI is a business that manages West Nile virus prevention programs for cities and counties. So in most of our customers, there had been a West Nile virus outbreak at some point in the past, and we managed a disease prevention program for them.
Yeah, I think you mentioned sort of the personal aspect of this, and like doing this at a time, during this in 2008, like it's like I think it feels like the world is imploding, and this community in particular, I think, feels an obligation to continue to serve and to continue to do this. And I look at this, there's 30 million small businesses, there are 30 million unemployed people. If we can grow those businesses and hire, one person each, like, problem solved, right? Like,
yep.
Not that easy. But I think when I started this, I was really intimidated by the finance side of it. I said, okay, I know that I could get in there and I can figure out how to lead, I can figure that, but I was intimidated by the finance part. And I think, it's this fear of the unknown of one, we're, oftentimes coming into this with not a ton of our own capital, and without a ton of sort of financial and business acumen. And I think as I've gotten more into it, I realized, one, there's actually significantly less personal capital that needs to be put to risk. And two, sort of the run up can be, that can be worked through. So I'd love that you kind of talk a little bit about those first couple of steps where folks are going, okay, they're just like immediately disqualifying themselves because they're like, well, I don't have a bunch of money, so I can never do this. So I think if you could kind of talk through that. So.
Well, it's the money, but it's also the finance experience, I think, is intimidating to a lot of people. And I remember hearing that from my classmates who were veterans themselves, and very similar thought process. And I remember thinking, you may not have sort of finance or deal experience, but you have sort of operations experience, leadership experience that many of these folks don't. So if you just step back and think about the process of searching and buying a business, but then also running it, there are different skill sets that are required along the way. So sure, maybe in a sourcing or deal execution context, the deal experience would help. But then what do you do when you get in to actually have to run a business and lead the people in that business? And so I would just remind people that you've got a lot more sort of operating and leadership experience than a lot of people who go down this path. And the way I think to solve for some of the maybe gaps in experience is surround yourself with people that can help. So one of the benefits of having investors, and people approach this differently, so not everyone brings investors to do this, but a lot of people do. And one of the benefits is that they can help with some of those things, whether it's running a model or thinking about valuation or thinking about how to raise capital from a bank or other investors. And so I wouldn't disqualify yourself at all. In fact, I didn't have any deal experience, none. And people might think I had business experience, but I think I had 3 years of working in the private sector when I was in my early 20s, and I'm just not sure how much that really should count. So for me, Blake, it's really, do you have a passion about wanting to run and own a small business? And to your point, I think there can be a lot of satisfying things about that in terms of just the leadership aspects and the opportunities that you can give to your employees. And if you have a passion for that, then you're qualified to do this. That's my honest view.
Yeah, and there's a question in here. Let me see if I can find it again. That it's the question is, how does the non-MBA young enlisted service member do this? And I'll sort of give my thought, and I think you got to this point was like, when I think about it, you can validate, you can tell me if this is true or not. When I think about this as a seller, so if I'm somebody that's like, I either don't have a plan to transition my business, or I know that I need to transition my business. The biggest obstacle that I think they need to overcome is, can I trust whomever this is to run this? And I think that, the military, at least for today, still has the overall trust of the community, and at least the opportunity to maybe get the door open to have the initial conversation. Then you got to sell it on your merits afterwards. So when I think about this, if I think about getting out of the military, that like the operational and the leadership experience is like gives you the ability to have that. And then like the finance and sort of deal side, like even you said, like, hey, like I went to a great business school, but I didn't have a ton of deal experience. So, maybe I think if you could maybe either validate or invalidate that and say that I think the attributes, I think outweigh the areas where there are challenges. And frankly, that's like what this community is about, is to like identify that, group that, and have that ecosystem to be able to support that.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And what I have found is, and it's to their great credit, but veterans are often humble about their service. And we've invested with some veterans, and I always tell them, don't, be humble, sure, but don't be shy about your experience. We have always found that it resonates with business owners. The vast majority of people in this country respect the service, appreciate it. And I do think it makes that initial conversation easier. So I agree with you, Blake.
Yeah. So this is a good question here. So talking about sort of the actual search process of finding the companies. So this is here. Did you know the seller first, or was it like running the numbers, viability, et cetera? So how did that come to be?
Yeah. So the way that we approached it is to step back and think about the criteria that we wanted in a business. And so these are not complicated concepts, but it's a way to, I think, boil the ocean, so to speak, and force some organization onto the search process. And so for us, it was a lot about the business model, and mainly what we wanted was a business that had recurring revenue. So think about, your cell phones are probably a bad example, but anything in your life where you're paying, a recurring monthly fee. There's a lot of businesses who have that structure as well. And so that was the most important thing to us. And then we wanted to be in an industry that was, number one, large enough, but also had some, growth or tailwind to it. And it didn't have to be 20% industry growth. That's pretty rare, but something that was sort of roughly 2 times GDP. And so what we did was, with those, there were some other criteria, but we don't have to get into that. But we had, let's say, 5 or 6 criteria we thought were important. And then what we did was use those criteria to then identify a list of industries that we thought matched well with those criteria. And once you have the list of industries, you can then reach out to business owners. And so to answer the question, we did not know the business owner we bought our company from. We met him roughly a year into our search process, and it took another 15 months to actually buy the company. And a big part of that was what you mentioned, Blake, just him getting comfortable that we would be able to not only take care of his customers, which were very important to him, but also his employees. So yeah.
And I think so. It's interesting to look at how the different ways you can go about this, and how, like, the reality is like, once you get into it, you start to get into it and have a process and work through that. I wonder about what are some, like, immediate, there's the question I'm getting at here is, like, how do you not waste your time in this process? Because there's going to be a lot of, like, you can keep yourself really busy and not be very productive. So what are some of the things that you early on in this process can be doing to, one, like, get sort of beef up like the operation or the business acumen, deal flow. So like, what are the things that people should be reading and be thinking about? But then as they're starting to look at companies, like, did you rule out things that were too small just because, you had a certain target, or, looking at it now, would you have got like, oh, maybe we would have taken something that was smaller. Maybe it was a little bit more complicated, but there could have been a bigger sort of reward on that. So I think some of those things where you're like, this is a quagmire, like, don't waste your time here, would be, helpful for like early stage.
Yeah. Well, I think your question is an important one, because the biggest enemy for someone that goes down this path, I think, is time. And there is not unlimited time. I don't think, depending on where people are in their family and career in general, you can't search forever. And so it's important to be efficient. And, not to beat the dead horse, but I think the way to manage that is going back to the criteria. And so if you have a list of criteria, you can bounce opportunities against those. And it's a way to force yourself to be objective. I've talked to people that have a lot more deal experience than I have, and they all say at some point in the deal process, you're going to lose subjectivity. And it's very easy to sort of fall in love with a business or even the business owner, even though it might not fit what you're looking for. And so just force yourself to have the criteria. What we had in front of our computers when we were searching on the wall, we had pasted our 6 criteria that were, I don't want to say they were sort of deal breakers, but they were very, very important. And every single business we saw as an opportunity, we would match against those criteria, and we actually would score them. So we had a very simple scoring process, but it gave us a number out of 10, and it just kept us honest. And so the other thing I would say, Blake, is I find that entrepreneurs looking for a business to buy are a little bit timid about getting to the valuation discussion with the business owner. Mm-hmm. So that's a difficult conversation to have, and it's fun to sort of learn about the business and talk to the business owner about what you might do and just learn from them. But most of the time there is a gap in what the business owner thinks their business might be worth and what you're likely to be willing to pay. And so what we advise people is to get to that conversation as soon as reasonable. And you can't do it in the first 5 minutes of your first phone call. But if you build a rapport, maybe on that second phone call, you can sort of start getting a feel for whether their expectations are going to be reasonable. And that's the best way, I think, to screen out stuff that might be fun or nice or sound exciting, but is ultimately going to be a waste of time because there's going to be no deal there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think we can kind of come at that from sort of one of 2 angles in the military. We're either going to be super direct about it, or going to feel like, well, like we're sort of going up the chain of command here and want to respect that. So I think it's important to, like, what I'll say is, like, you gotta be your own best advocate, because it like, I got sucked in just when I was talking to folks and looking and like, now I've got some more friends, but like, I didn't buy the business. So, so here's a question, I think. So what, and there's a follow on to this. So what are some common reasons that these potential businesses are up for sale? And then my follow on is, if they're up for sale, do you actually want to buy them? And my guess my guess is that if they're up for sale, there's probably a reason that you don't want to buy it, but you can.
I disagree with that. I think one of the reasons that this is a massive opportunity is that there is a generation of business owners that are approaching retirement. I mean, it's been that way for 15, 20, 30 years, and that's got another decade or more life cycle to it, I think. So when you meet a business owner who's 48 and they want to sell their business and they say they just want to focus on other things, yeah, that's a yellow flag. If you meet a business owner who's 68 and he tells you, well, I promised my wife that I was going to retire by the time I was 65, and I blew right through that, and here I am, and I know I've got to do something so I can enjoy, the rest of my life. Like that resonates, and that's real. So it doesn't, just because they're selling does not mean it's a bad business. So there's a lot of situational I think, context that makes this work. And as the way that entrepreneurship through acquisition works is you not only are providing a liquidity event for them in the form of the purchase price, but you're also solving for a succession plan. And because you're going to step in and run the business. A lot of business owners in this size range that we're talking about have done a very poor job of succession planning. And so you're actually solving a problem for them. Does that make sense, Blake?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to your, so there, there's a couple of questions that come from that. To your point about not being timid about asking this, I think it's easy to look at it and go, well, I don't have a ton of my own capital. I don't have a ton of business experience. Who am I to come in here and tell this person that's been running this thing for 30 years that I can do that? But like you are solving a massive problem for this person because they don't have a daughter that's ready to take it over or wants to take it over, and you're stepping in and do that, and that's valuable. And I'll say to not undersell that. And the other part of that I would ask about is sort of the education of the seller, so that as a buyer, as an operator, you can come in and say, here is the value that I'm bringing, and here's why, like, you actually need me. Like, maybe I don't know how to weld, and you've got this, plumbing company, but I do know how to run this. So, would love to kind of hear about how do you, took you 15 months, you said, for this first deal to really get over that. What are some lessons learned to get over that hump and to kind of walk through that process of helping, level the expectations, share that you're coming with some value to take this thing over. And then there's a couple of other questions if we've got time. So Liz, you'll tell me if we've got time.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that the business owners are almost always entrepreneurs themselves. So they likely founded the business. They were at one point likely in your shoes. Maybe they didn't have a lot of capital available to them. Maybe they mortgaged their house or had 2 jobs to start the company. Like, that is a very common story. And so the idea that you are an entrepreneur who has this dream of owning your own business very much resonates with the small business owner. And so I don't think there's sort of magic in proving that you're going to be the best at running the plumbing company. Mm-hmm. It's more about illustrating, your passion for entrepreneurship in leading people and growing organizations. Because I actually think it can be dangerous to, pretend that you might know more about plumbing than this, man or woman who's been running this business for 30 years. So you have to strike the right balance, I think, of showing strengths in other areas that might not be specific to that business, and creating the relationship where you can sort of learn from the business owner in a way. So anyway, I think the overarching answer I would say is remember that these are entrepreneurs. And because I used to worry about this, I am 28 trying to buy this person's business. How is that going to be received? Mm-hmm. And what I found was that it just didn't even register with them. Like they started their business when they were 31 or whatever, and they're entrepreneurs. So it's not something that really jumps to their mind, I don't think.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's something that can get lost, and I think has gotten lost over the last handful of months, where everything has gone to this virtual environment of just the power of like human contact, and the power of like the human spirit, and the fact that a lot of these folks, didn't just start this because they wanted to start it. Like, they started it to create a legacy, or to create jobs, or to pursue their goals. And I think that's something that you all on this call bring in spades. And it's easy to get lost in the technicalities of it. And then frankly, to get out over your skis because you're feeling like you should tell them you're more equipped than maybe you are. So a little bit more of a technical question is, can you explain the process of equity transfer from either the prior business owner or potential investor? So maybe a little bit about, let's see if maybe we can break this into two parts. One is like the initial purchase, and then the sale, and maybe just like really round numbers or sort of, what to expect or.
And do you mean the sale once you've owned it and run the business? Is that?
I think, well, let's start with the actual purchase. So you're going to come in and purchase it. So maybe you're doing it with a group of investors. So what is sort of the CEO owner, that's, you are putting it. So if I'm going to buy, the plumbing company, what can I kind of expect without either taking a ton of maybe SBA debt or my own capital, sort of a range there of like what kind of equity I can have going into the purchase, and then so let's maybe start there.
Yeah, so I was wondering if they meant sort of just the technicalities of the transaction, but just
I think that's probably how it is. If you want to,
I can answer both questions, I guess. Okay. But very high level, what would normally happen is you connect with the business owner, you like their business, they think you're a fit, you share a little bit of information. Usually you sign a non-disclosure agreement for that. They might share financials, and you ultimately get to a point where you make them an offer. And that usually would then turn into a letter of intent, which is not, a 6-page document, let's say, and it just outlines the agreement that you have with the seller. The LOI, letter of intent, usually affords you a period of exclusivity where you're able to do further due diligence on the business. That usually is a 90-day period, let's say. And that culminates in a purchase and sale agreement, which is a more lengthy legal document, call it 40 to 50 pages, whatever, and that consummates your purchase of that business. So in a classic sort of traditional search fund structure, and one in which you've raised money from a group of investors, the way that it works is investors provide the capital for the acquisition. So let's say they provide $5 million of equity capital, and they own usually anywhere from 70 to 80% of the business, and the CEO earns somewhere between 20 and 30%. So if you fast forward 5 years, let's say, and you sold the business for, let's say, 20 million. Am I too into the weeds, Blake, or is this?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
So fast forward, and in 5 years, you sell the business for 20 million. I'm just using round numbers here. The $5 million of equity that the investors provided, you give that back to them. So there's $15 million left over, and you split that between the CEO and the investors, usually in a sort of 80-20 or 70-30 split.
Yeah. And I'd love to, so thank you. I think that helps sort of walk through that. And the book does a good job of really going through that in greater detail. So I really encourage you to buy the book and get through that. What are some of the things that are sort of the red flags? Like, I know you mentioned, so like, hey, like 48 years old, like they're trying to sell a thing. So there's like, so the early red flags, and then when you're in that due diligence process, and I think this is where it's like, you want it to happen, you're trying to make it happen, and then like something happens, you're like, man, I knew that, I wish I knew that was going to happen. Or like, of course, like it's going to get, it's going to spend an extra 3 months between going back and forth with attorneys, or like, what are some of those things? So like at the very beginning, we're like, this isn't bad. It's like, I got to walk away. And then the other, like, we're doing the due diligence, you're in it, LOI signed, you're marching towards that. And you're like, what to expect? Like, hey, the owner's going to get cold feet at this point. And that's the time where you go and you set up time, you go have lunch, and like, you talk about it, and like, feel like.
Yeah. I mean, that the second part of that is easier to answer, because I think then the first question, it's always just deal specific. I feel like they're yellow flags, but sure. Sellers, almost always, this is like you, this is the first business they've sold. And so they are not familiar with the process. And unfortunately, oftentimes, in my opinion, they don't have the right advisors at the table. And so they may have, the attorney who, helped them with their, will, like literally. I mean, and those attorneys are not qualified to do an M&A transaction, but that's who they hire. So that for us is a big flag because it always makes it more difficult. So anyway, there are points in the process where sellers get deal fatigue. There's no question about that. And it takes some careful handling, I think. And a few points are when you first send the purchase agreement, that's usually a little later in the transaction. So let me back up a little bit, I guess. But once you sign the LOI, you're going to have a lot of requests. So you want 5 years of financials, for example. You want an org chart. You want a list of employees and what they get paid. This is all part of diligence. It can be overwhelming for someone who's also, by the way, trying to run a business every day. And so we try to stage the request and, bring it down to a manageable level, particularly early, so that we can understand or get the information, like the most important information first, so sort of gate whether we want to continue moving forward. But they will eventually get tired of the information request you have. And then when you send the purchase agreement, which let's say is 3 to 4 weeks prior to the scheduled closing date, that is always a surprise to them, because that's, if you have hired or retained proper M&A counsel, which I would highly advise, even though it's not cheap, but it will serve you well, then that is a comprehensive document that I think can be overwhelming to sellers. And that usually takes a conversation to sort of walk them back from the edge of the cliff and to continue forward. So.
Yeah, that's great. So it's basically expect they're going to want to walk, and
Always.
and you're going
to every deal dies before it gets done. I mean,
yeah, that's great.
Ours died 3 times, I think. I mean, and it was mostly around the business owner just not being 100% sure that he actually wanted to sell. It was not about terms or anything else, but just this was his baby. He didn't have any children, so the employees in the company were his family, and he just had a really hard time of getting comfortable with letting that go.
Yeah.
But every deal has its own issues, and they all die at some point. It's just inevitable.
That's great. So I don't know if there are any kids in your rooms, but I'm going to give a heads up here. So our Nick Toronto, who's a Marine who built and scaled Plated, calls them whiffio moments, which are we're fucked, it's over. And he's like, we've had at least a dozen of those in that, to include at one point their storage units of food floating down the river during a flood. So, all right, I'm going to try to rip through a handful of questions. We've got about 5 more minutes. So let's see. So if you're working with a broker or an advisor, or you're having you've got that sort of middle person, what's a typical fee to expect to pay? And then my other one is how do you avoid those?
Well, almost, usually if there's a broker involved, they are representing the seller, and the seller is responsible for their fee.
Yep.
And that can range anywhere from, call it 2 to 8% of purchase price.
Yep. Okay.
Usually they're representing the seller.
Yep. All right, let me see what else here. Yeah, that's great. So just some good advice there to the panel. So this is a question about early on, who's initiating the actual search fund? Is it I know that there are formal search funds. I think Anna Capital Partners is on the call, so I know that they're backing others. But I think the question is if you're in this process of searching, how do you make yourself visible for investors? If you're hey, I don't come from a network of high net worth individuals. I don't have a ton of money, and I'm not sure where to start. So maybe how do you prepare yourself, put your highlight reel together, as it were?
Yeah, so I think I appreciate your sharing the HBS book, but I would just throw in that Stanford Business School does a lot of research on search funds. They've been doing that for the longest, so I would say that's probably the best resource, honestly. And they've got panels and all sorts of stuff. So I would look at that, and I found this in 2008, and I think it's still true today, although the community has grown a lot. But both entrepreneurs and investors are very open with their time, and they all have sort of been down the path of trying to learn how this works and are more than willing to talk to people who are interested in this. And so I would encourage you to talk to as many people as you can to just understand their own experiences. There are veterans in the search fund community that I think can play an important role for this group. And it's just doing that and having those conversations. And as you mentioned, Blake, there are now investors that have very purposefully designed a strategy around veterans. And Anna Kappa, I think, is the thought leader there. I think Mike's on the call, but they are very selectively backing veterans to do this. And so there are groups out there that you can find. But I think the more people you talk to, obviously, that leads to other introductions. And I think you can find your way to the right people who can be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And all right, so two things. Let's see if we can get this under the gun here. So what are your best suggestions for circumventing on-market broker advertised deals? So things that brokers are advertising. And then do you have suggestions for finding alternative sort of on or off-market deals?
Yeah, so I think having an industry approach is the short answer. So if you have industries that you've identified that you think are interesting, then that helps you identify businesses in the industry that you can reach out to. And, let's just use landscaping as an example, just because I look out my window here and can see that. So if you've got landscaping as a focus, and you then can reach out to local businesses or on a regional level, and I think it just makes the initial conversation easier. One thing I will say, though, is I think in this part of the market, call it, maybe 500,000 to $1.5 million of earnings. So not revenue, but earnings, so profit. Having a broker involved is not the end of the world. I mean, that market is still very inefficient, and the valuations are reasonable just because it's an inefficient market. And so don't automatically assume that having a broker or advisor involved is a bad thing. In fact, oftentimes they can help mitigate some of the issues we talked about a minute ago in terms of the seller sort of having reservations or this being their first experience. The broker can talk them through that. And if the broker's good, there's plenty of bad ones, but if they're good, they can help the process actually. So don't assume it's a negative.
Yeah, I think that's great, because we've got some good comments in here. Friends don't let friends use brokers. So if you're a bad broker, pay attention to what you heard today. If you're a good broker, then connect with all these folks. So how you can get connected, you can go to bunkerlabs.org. You can join the online community. There's a CEO Circle group called Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition. So you can go online right now, go to bunkerlabs.org and join the Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition group. I'm super thankful to have Jay take a ton of your time out to talk through this. You've been helping us think through how we go to kind of market in this space. So I want to publicly thank you for your efforts and appreciate that. And it sounds like we now need to go to Stanford so we can say, hey, Stanford, Harvard was here. So are you gonna join? Are you in or are you out? So for those of you that are well connected at Stanford Business School, that's my ask, is that you help us bring the Stanford community to the Bunker community. And then I just want to say this to those that are listening. So there's a Marine out there that helped us put this research together, who's in our veterans and residents in Boston. So John Mahoney, thank you for that. So I'm going to give you that credit there. So of the 2.5 million veteran businesses, 2 million of them are owned by people that are 55 and older. So of the 30 million small businesses, now almost 40% are owned by people that are 55 and older. Like, we are at this time in history right now where there is a massive opportunity to take over these companies, and an opportunity to do it in a way that strengthens communities, creates jobs, creates generational wealth. And you all have the ability to do that. So our vision here is to take this fragmented network, tie it all together so that we've got great folks that have been through the process, great folks that can fund the process, great folks that can support the process throughout. So my ask, in addition to Stanford, is that when you go to that Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition page, tell us what you're looking for. Say, hey, look, I was hoping to hear this and I didn't hear this, or I'm in the process of searching right now, or I'd never heard about search until today. And our team is going to help build out that. We've got sort of a 3-phase launch over the next 18 months to build the funnel and to support folks that are in this searching and selling process. So, our country is looking for you all to step up, and this is a way to do it. And this is a way to do it and create real wealth and create real impact. So with that, I want to thank Jay and say, go to bunkerlabs.org, join the group, tell us what you need. This is about you, and I'll turn it over to Liz to wrap everything up. Thank you all.
Thanks, Blake. Thanks, Jay. This was an awesome session. I know that we didn't get to a lot of our viewers' questions. We just had them coming in. So if you go to the link, bunkeronline.org, and you go in that group, you can post your questions there. You can also at myself or Blake, we're all on bunkeronline.org, so we can definitely find the answer for you if somebody in the group doesn't have it already. And I encourage you just to connect with your community there. If entrepreneurship through acquisition isn't your focus, there's probably a group for you, or you can also create one in our online community. So Blake and Jay, thanks so much. And we look forward to seeing you guys at our virtual connect around the same topic on the 15th.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Blake.